is Richard III, which is about this sort of elephant man king. He'd be done in computers now by Andy Serkis covered in balls, but in the original, he was just a man with a pillow up his jumper. It's quite modern because it's a lead part for a disabled actor, providing they don't mind being depicted as the most evil man ever.
I am determined to prove a villain.
Richard III is actually based on the real King Richard III, who was in the Wars of the Roses.
A horse! A horse, my kingdom, for a horse!
At the end, he loses his horse and ends up wandering around a car park looking for it, where he eventually dies. Because in those days, you couldn't find your horse just by beeping your keys and making its arse light up. It's quite moving and human, because we've all worried we might die in a car park if we, lose the ticket and can't get the barrier up, and just die in there. Shakespeare makes you think about those things, and that's hard. When Queen Elizabeth died, James I took over. He was Scottish and dead into witches, which Shakespeare put straight into Macbeth, like an arse kisser. Macbeth is a tale of paranoia and king murder set in Scotland, probably for tax reasons. It's about a man called Macbeth who's so famous he's only got one name, like Brangelina.
Macbeth, Macbeth, Macbeth.
Macbeth also has a female sidekick called Lady Macbeth, who is very much the Ms. Pac-Man to Macbeth's Pac-Man. In a spooky encounter, Macbeth meets some witches who tell him he's going to become King of Scotland, which back then was apparently considered a good thing. The witches aren't in it as much as you'd expect. Quite a lot of it's about ordinary murder.
This is a sorry sight.
It seems a shame to introduce witches in it and then make all the murders normal with just knives and swords. Maybe if Shakespeare had thought a bit harder, he'd have put some magic murders in, like a big magic hand coming out of a toilet and pulling someone's arse inside out. Nevertheless, there's plenty of violence and bloodshed, and an iconic scene in which Macbeth is startled at dinner by the unexpected appearance of Banquo's ghost, played here for some reason by the letter H.
Which of you have done this?
What, my good lord?
Thou canst not say I did it. Never shake thy Goldilocks at me.
By now, Shakespeare had built a considerable body of work, which is collected in something called the First Folio. This is the actual book that Shakespeare wrote with his bare hands, the only remaining copy of any of his plays. It's amazing to think that if anything happened to this, the entire works of Shakespeare will be lost forever. So before I touch it, I need to put on special white gloves.
Well, we don't actually need to wear white gloves, Phillomena.
Oh.
The advice we have and the best practice we follow is not to wear gloves because you lose the sensitivity in your fingers and you're more likely to damage the book by wearing gloves than not.
Now.
Well, if you've got clean hands, we'd say take the gloves off and we don't need them at all.
Well, I've brought them, so...
It's very good of you to bring them, but we don't need them and we can't let you turn the pages of the book if you've got them on.
Simon Sharma gets to wear gloves.
But he doesn't wear them here.
Why not?
Because when we're handling books and documents, we don't need to wear gloves at all.
So what's the difference between a book and a folio?
A folio's the name that's given to the paper that's in the book, so it implies it's been folded once, which is where the name folio comes from.
So why don't we just call it a book?
We can call it a book. That's absolutely fine.
You know when you read a word in a book and you sort of hear that word in your head, how do they get the sounds into the ink to make it play in your head?
Well, what they're doing is they've got all the words sort of written down and spelled out, and they put those letters into the printing process and then print them on the page. And then it's as you're reading it, you're making the sounds in your head.
You can hear them talking, can't you?
Yeah, because you know what the words mean and how they sound. You can then play it back to yourself, if you like.
Are these plays like computer code and the actors like characters in a computer game?
I suppose that's one way of looking at it. The words are the lines, so they're telling the actors what they need to say, and then you'll find stage directions telling them what to do. So in a way, they're sort of like a set of instructions.
So in a way, Shakespeare invented computer games?
I don't think he'd have seen it like that, and that's not quite the case of what it is, but you can make a comparison or an analogy between the two.
So he invented computer games?
No, not really, no.
That's amazing. Most of Shakespeare's plays are about stuff that actually happened, like Kings, or could happen, like a prince talking to a ghost. But some of his plays are more magical. They're fantasies. The Tempest is about this shipwreck, which happens at the beginning, not at the end like Titanic, which is a brave move. The survivors get stuck on this island where this wizard lives with his daughter and these monsters. What's interesting about The Tempest is that usually Shakespeare's stories sort of make sense, even though all the talking's in gibberish. But in The Tempest, the story doesn't make sense either.
You are three men of sin, whom destiny, that hath to instrument this lower world, and what is in't, the never surfeited she hath caused to belch up you.
It's like Shakespeare squared, which is probably why hardcore Shakespeare fans like it, because it shows they understand it, which they can't.
The way Shakespeare's written makes it hard to wrap your head around, which is why it's taught in school when your brain's at its bendiest, by people like this man, the fictional English teacher from TV drama Educating Yorkshire.
When you teach your kids Shakespeare, do their heads grow physically bigger?
No, they don't, no.
How does iambic pentameter work?
I think you're talking about iambic pentameter, which is the way that kind of...
Iambic pentameter?
Pentameter, yeah.
Pentameter?
Well, pentameter, so... It would be a line of prose that would have 10 syllables with 5 particular stresses on.
Not pentameter?
No, not pentameter, no, it's pentameter.
Right. Someone told me I was misinformed. It's fine.
Who told you? Oh, right. No, it's pentameter, yeah. Iambic pentameter, just to clarify.
I wonder if all of Shakespeare's plays are suitable for kids, because there's that one about the dairymaid, isn't there, with a special pump?
I'm not aware that that's a Shakespeare play.
She works on a farm. She's got a special pump.
No, I don't think that's a Shakespeare play at all. No, it doesn't sound very much like a Shakespeare play at all.
It's disgusting.
Shakespeare once said, "Every dog will have his day." And with his own theatre and lots of plays, he was certainly having his. But soon that day would turn to night, a long dark night, like in Finland. In 1596, Shakespeare's son Hamlet shuffled off this mortal coil. Then he died, and a few years later, his father John kicked the bucket and also died. As Shakespeare's life went sad, so did his plays.
If you were asked to pick what Shakespeare did best, most people would say tragedy, which is one of the few things he has in common with Steps.
Shakespeare's tragedy plays are the most performed of all his works, none more so than Hamlet, with its famous speech about bees.
To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them. To die, to sleep, no more, and by sleep to say we end the heartache and the 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to. It's the consummation devoutly to be wished, to die, to sleep. To sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub, for in that sleep of death, what dreams may come, when we have shuffled off this mortal coil, must give us pause.
What was all that about then?
Yes. Poor Yorick.
Most people have heard of Hamlet, even if they haven't seen it, because it sounds quite boring. So what's it about? Well, I have seen it, and it's about 4 hours long. The main character, who is Hamlet, is visited by his father, who is a ghost.
Remember me.
The ghost tells Hamlet to take revenge, but Hamlet doesn't know what to do, and that's why the play is so long.
I do not know why, yet I live to say this thing's to do.
In something gritty, like Taken, Liam Neeson knows exactly what to do.
I will look for you. I will find you. And I will kill you.
So you're banged straight down to action, which makes the film really exciting and over quite quickly.
If Shakespeare had written Taken, it'd be 4 hours long, and be mainly Liam Neeson fretting and pacing and talking to bones. That's the basic difference between Hamlet and Taken. Liam Neeson makes up his mind.
I told you I would find you.
Shakespeare never wrote anything even close to this white-knuckle knife fight in a kitchen. Instead, he wrote incredibly long speeches full of words. How important are the words in a Shakespeare's play? Like, could you do it without the words?
Without the words, there isn't much left, to be honest. I think probably that's the bedrock of what we do.
And to be fair, Shakespeare was no ordinary wordmonger. He didn't just use words, he invented them too.
Shakespeare made up words, didn't he? He did that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
He made up so many words.
He made up about 1,000 words that we still use today.
Did he?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I've got a list of words
Okay.
that he might or might not have made up.
Okay.
And you tell me if Shakespeare made them up or not.
Okay.
Cuckoo.
No, I don't think so.
Ukulele.
No.
Truffle balling.
No.
Ceefax.
No.
Omnishambles.
No.
Nutribullet.
No.
Mixtape.
No.
Spork.
No.
Rufflecopter.
No.
Bumberclart.
No.
Zhuzh.
No.
Potatoey.
No.
Bromance.
No.
Sushi.
No.
Titwank.
No.
Hobnob.
Yes.
Suppose it makes sense that he came up with Hobnob, doesn't it? Because it's the sort of the most old-fashioned of biscuits. It's got like bits of hay in it and stuff.
Yeah.
It's like eating a thatched roof.
By the end of his life, Shakespeare had reinvented theatre, created memorable characters, built a playhouse, invented a language and secured a legacy. But the Swan of Avon still had one last trick up his sleeve. Throughout this programme, we've seen how Shakespeare's genius spans 7 different genres of play.
But all these pale into insignificance against Shakespeare's most greatest work, Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is a proper bloodthirsty, action-packed epic which skillfully combines all the genres Shakespeare invented into one coherent work. It's got everything. It's got history, comedy, Shakespearean.
Have you ever held a sword before?
I was the best archer in our hamlet.
Tragedy.
Horror. Fantasy. And romance.
Game of Thrones also has one of Shakespeare's best kings in it, Queen Joffrey.
Surely there are others out there who still dare to challenge my reign?
Queen Joffrey, like all Shakespeare's queens, is played by a young boy in a dress, and they stuck with that when they adapted it for television. Game of Thrones remains the most popular of all Shakespeare's plays, and the only one to have been made into a television series, which proves it's the best. It's almost as if at the end of his life, Shakespeare finally worked out how to write something really good.
His final masterpiece accomplished, Shakespeare's work on our planet was complete. He died on his birthday, which must have been depressing for his family, who would have had to finish his cake with tears in their little Shakespearean eyes.
We don't know what Shakespeare's last words were. Probably made up ones. Nobody wrote them down, so they couldn't have been all that.
I used to think Shakespeare was stuffy and pointless and not for me. But exploring his world and works for the past half hour has really brought him to life, so I'm gutted he's just died. He remains the best and only bard this country has ever produced.
Good night, sweet prince. I'm loving angels instead.